So let me just get my screen sorted out here. All righty, good afternoon, good morning, good noon from wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today for the Moneyball for Policing webinar, Powerful Analytics to Support Leadership and People Strategy in Policing Services. We have representatives from across the country, a variety of different law enforcement services. So whether it's municipal or governmental and so forth, so that's terrific. And again, thank you for joining us. Before I do continue, though, I would like to take this opportunity to express my own sorrow and condolences to the members of the Indigenous law enforcement agencies who are joining us on the webinar today regarding the truly tragic and frankly shameful situation that's unfolding in the at the former Kamloops residential school, and sadly may yet be a story told across the country. This is indeed an opportunity or a time of reckoning for Canada, and I hope that this is not a lost opportunity. So with that, we're going to move into the agenda. So the agenda for today really covers a few different areas. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the power of people data. And then we're going to move into what I think will be of even greater interest to you, and that is real life experience in using this data from a terrific panel that we have here today. Then we're going to take a look at that data and look at the different ways that it can be applied in police services. And then we're going to go to a Q&A. That said, if you have any questions through the course of the webinar, please do not hesitate to include them in the method that's going to be provided here in just a second. At the end of the webinar, I have what I call the 3 Fs, the finale, which is kind of a summary of the session, some follow-up that you'll have an opportunity to participate in, and some free stuff for those of you who hang in there to the end of the webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah Burke, who is one of our client services staff, part of our terrific client services team, and Michaela Picones, who is new to the team and is kind of apprenticing today with Hannah through the course of this webinar in terms of co-piloting. So Hannah, over to you.
All right, thank you, Mitch. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today. Just before we jump into the session, I want to mention some house rules. So throughout the session, please put any questions you have into the Q&A box and all other comments into the chat box so that Michaela and I can keep track of them easily. As Mitch mentioned, your questions will be answered throughout the session and at the end. And if you have any tech issues throughout the session, please send myself or Michaela a private message and we will help you out. Over to you, Mitch.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much. So the objectives today really are quite simple. The first objective is to provide you with some information about analytics. It seems to be a popular term, and we'll dive into that, not in a complicated way, but in kind of a basic way. And more specifically, in terms of people analytics. Then we're going to take that information and that knowledge and talk about its application in police services, again, through the lenses and the eyes of my guests. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our guests for today. I'm thrilled to have both Carrie Lynn and Diane join us for this webinar. I will start by introducing each of the panelists, and then I'm going to ask them to talk a little bit about their police service more specifically. So Carrie Lynn has been with the Greater Sudbury Police Service for 24 years, and she served actually as a police officer for 17 years, which I actually didn't know, but learned recently. And she was a sergeant who headed up a number of different initiatives and divisions with the Greater Sudbury Police Services before transitioning to the civilian role of manager of human resources and professional development. She has experience in training staff, in recruitment, in managing promotional and lateral transfers. She conducts workplace investigations and certainly deals with the whole notion of mediating disputes. She's a strong advocate for the use of analytically based practices, especially in terms of finding ways to better her organization. So I'm going to first go to Carrie Lynn. And Carrie Lynn, if you wouldn't mind maybe elaborating a little bit to tell us a little more about the Greater Sudbury Police Service.
Certainly. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Greater Sudbury Police Service is located in Northern Ontario. We have 278 sworn, about 200 civilian members. So we're kind of a mid-sized service and very involved service. We've got a lot of units, both on the civilian and sworn front. So we're constantly trying to professionally develop employees to go into other units, making sure that our trainers know how to train other employees, and then that we can promote those and through succession planning. So yeah, it's a great organization. I've loved being part of it for 24 years, and I'm excited to let you know how we're using some analytics to better our employees.
Thanks very much, Carrie Lynn. And now I'd like to introduce Diane Kelly. Diane started with the Waterloo Region Police Service in 2007 and moved into HR in 2011, working in terms of benefits and pension administration and security clearance. But more recently, she's been involved in the selection processes for specialized police positions. She's been involved in labor relations, as well as advising mid to senior level management in terms of HR matters. And Diane has also been kind of the key person in a recently developed talent strategy at Waterloo Region Police Service, and has really been kind of the person behind the analytics and the background work that's needed to inform that process. So I'm really happy to have both Carrie Lynn and Diane join us today, because really it's their perspective that I think will make things more relevant for you. So thank you. Full disclosure, I do work for Predictive Success Corporation. The analytics that I work with and my clients work with are called the Predictive Index. But what I'm going to be emphasizing today is really about using analytics, not necessarily the tools. I mean, obviously, people are at their discretion in terms of whatever tools that they want and that work for them. I also should say that my guests are not being paid for today, although, as a courtesy, the least I can do is send their teams a free lunch. So just want to be very upfront about that. So today we're going to start with a bit of an introduction to people analytics. I call this People Analytics Part 1, the power of people data. And many of you have heard the story about Billy Beane and the open A's and the notion of Moneyball. That's why where the terminology comes from. You might have seen the movie. Basically what happened was Billy Beane was confronted with a drastic cut by management in the salary allocation for the players. So he said, I need to figure out a way to get the most out of our people. And what he did was he developed a system of analytics which looked at past performance, and he used that to predict future performance of his team, and he ended up being very successful. And this whole notion of data analysis and people analytics grew out of this and similar initiatives to a much wider application in society, to companies, to sports, to so many different areas. You've heard of Sabre analytics and so forth. So that's kind of what is the originating notion here. I want to distinguish between analytics, analysis, and assessments. Assessments are the tools. They're the tools that are used to generate objective data. I'll talk about objective data in a minute. Analysis is where you take that data and you try to understand, so what happened and what is this telling me? And then the analytics really focuses on diving deeper into why did this happen and what will happen next, in two scenarios. One, if we just leave things the way they are, or if we're not happy with the status quo, what can we do and what can we anticipate will happen based on our analysis of this data. So it really comes down to using objective data to identify patterns that helps to inform your future. So what should you expect from your analytics? Awareness. You want objective awareness. And when we talk about people analytics, you're looking at self. And you know, you've probably run into people before who you may think or realize don't necessarily have a strong sense of who they are. And yet, you know, it's understanding yourself is really key, as I'll emphasize in a minute. Then understanding your colleagues, the members of your team, both individually, you know, in your relationships with your teams, whether it's a division or whether it's some other part of your organization, but as well collectively. Is your team self-aware? Do you understand your biases and you know, maybe some blind spots and the strengths of your team? And finally, the larger organization. Are people happy about going to work every day? Are they engaged? What's the direction of your organization? And particularly, how does the behavior of your leadership and your leadership team line up with the organization? And all of this really assumes a much greater significance when you put understanding of individuals against roles. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a second. So when we dive into analytics, and now we're going to go a little more deeply into people analytics. And what are people analytics? It's really understanding the motivators and the behaviors of your people. What motivates them? What drives them? What gets them out of bed every morning? What can I anticipate from them in terms of behavior? Also understand how do they learn. Are they the kind of people that grab stuff quickly, or are they the kind of people that really need to dive into the material that they're learning? And based on this, you're going to have a greater understanding and the probability of predicting their behavior. But when you translate this now to people analytics in the workplace, it starts with these pieces around people analytics, but then it goes into this other dimension, and that is the insertion or the inclusion of the behavior and even the cognitive requirements of the job. And with that, with the understanding the person and their behaviors and motivators, understanding the behavioral requirements of a job, then you get to understand the gap and fit between the people and their job. You get to an understanding of the gap and fit between one person and another person. And from that, you're going to be able to more capably predict performance and make better informed strategic people decisions. And what kind of people decisions am I talking about? Well, specifically, whether it's in police services or in other organizations like the one that I led, it's about focused recruitment, like really zeroing in on what are you looking for and what are the lenses that really allow you to zero in on the behaviors and drives of a person and matching those up. More informed promotion to leadership. Diane might reference this a little bit later. Individualized coaching, development, and onboarding. Not everybody needs the same coaching. So having the tools to be able to recognize and customize coaching and development. And then helping the leaders you currently have in their own management effectiveness. Being able to look at your teams, not only in terms of teams, but when you're assembling teams. Do you have a balance of perspectives, for example? Taking the temperature of your organization and looking at teams of two. That's what a relationship, interpersonal two-person relationship is. It's really a team of two. And then using this across all aspects of the organization, both in terms of sworn/uniform and civilian. The information you use now, we're going to dive into the data. It really needs to be valid, accurate, and accessible, especially for things like gender, age, and language, ethnicity. In the world we live in today, public services like police services, education, government, municipalities are being held to a higher standard of ensuring that there is diversity and inclusion, and that there is, that we are eradicating, if you will, any perceptions of bias or discrimination. And so the tools that you use need to be available and accessible to all people. to the extent that you can. It needs to be relevant and immediately applicable to your organization. And it needs to be efficiently gathered, easy to understand, and practical to apply. Because you know what happens when it takes you an hour to complete an assessment, or it's a 50-page report, then the application becomes arduous and time consuming, and nobody has time for that. So one of the free resources I'm going to be sending you is this kind of a checklist that allows you to, whether you're looking at your own data resources now, or whether you're in the process of selecting some information here on the kind of things that you might want to look for. Okay, we have our first poll. So over to I don't know, is it Hannah or Michaela? I'm going to ask you these questions, or I've got these statements for you, and I'm going to ask you to respond to the poll. We have the data gathering tools that meet all these criteria. So I put the criteria at the bottom: valid, accurate, assessment, and so forth. Or we have data gathering tools that meet some of these criteria. Or we have data gathering tools, but they don't really meet this criteria. Or finally, we don't use data gathering tools. So let's get this poll going, and let's get some sense of what we have here with the group.
Yeah, Mitch, sorry, just give us 1 second. There's just a technical issue on our end.
Okay, and if if it takes a while, no problem, we'll just move on.
Okay, just give me 1 second.
I actually didn't include a selection for I don't know. I guess I probably should have done that as well.
Yeah, you know what, Mitch, is not working on our end. I don't know what
Okay,
the technical
no
issue
problem. Let's move on. Okay, so when you are gathering data, this is another graphic. I'm going to send this to all of you as well. And so it's the 3 steps to diagnosing people problems. I don't know if I want to look from the perspective of problems, but 3 steps to diagnosing. Sorry. First of all, measure what matters. Okay. If you're looking for specific feedback or reflection on your organization, make sure you're targeting into things that matter, that are going to best inform that. Then find the right tools. If you use colors, for example, and I'm not criticizing any of these, colors or Myers-Briggs for team development, or for individual development, or for a day of some type of professional development, or some kind of fun day of team building, fine. But if you're looking at using those kinds of things, for example, for recruitment, and I know that sounds crazy, but it has actually happened in the public sector where they've used tools like this, and they've ended up getting into difficulty because they're not appropriate for that purpose. And then finally, figure out how often you need to do this and when. All right, we're going to move to the panel, enough from me. So I'm going to be asking both Carrie Lynn and Diane to provide us with some insight into their specific police services. First of all, tell us a little bit about what was happening in the service that, was the status quo and maybe indicated a need for change. And what ended up being sort of the priorities or the goals that came out of that recognition. And why maybe did you decide to move to analytics or to a particular project? So I'm going to start with Carrie Lynn, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I actually really enjoyed how you made the linkage to analytics, really answering that why. And those are usually the questions that come to HR. Why is this candidate not doing well in the position that they've been hired for? Why can't we find the right type of candidates for this job? Why is this trainer and coach having issues with this candidate? Why are these 2 employees not getting along? And so to really try to figure out objectively, not basing it on who is the person or whether you like the person, you really needed to go to analytics and try to figure out, why is this happening? One of my best examples, I think, is emergency communications, 911 dispatchers. I think a lot of the services listening today can probably relate to this. Extremely hard position to hire for. And my OACP counterparts across the province say the same thing. It's just, so why is that happening? What are the behaviors and traits, strengths that we need in those candidates? And so analytics started to help us figure out the answers to some of those questions. And then exactly what you said, expanding from there into, so how do we specifically coach this person? What does the trainer need to know about that person? How do we help that person succeed? How do we recruit the right people for this position? And that's just one example. There's been many.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. Diane, over to you. Tell us about the status quo in Waterloo Region and what emerged as your areas of focus or challenge, and why you think going in this direction was maybe one of the answers to that.
Yeah, thank you. So the way we really started out was with a goal of adding psychometrics to our external recruiting process. So this was how PI was presented to me initially, it was as a hiring tool. And so on the hiring side, we were looking for ways, of course, to avoid making mishires. We were looking at job fit and how can we understand our candidates a little bit better before we hire them. But then this quickly expanded into becoming more of a team and leadership dynamics tool, looking at personal behavioral drives. So the goal or priority area for our service really morphed from hiring alone into hiring and improving relationships within teams, between supervisors and direct reports. And another related need that was really acute for our service is the issues around diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And how can we make our workplace not only more diverse, but more inclusive? And so we've been using the PI tools to address that.
Okay, thank you. So when I approached both Carrie Lynn and Diane to participate today, I was looking at, the Greater Sudbury Police Service has been using this a lot on the operational side, labor relations side, and the Waterloo Region Police Service had just developed a strategy, an overall talent management strategy. And as Diane said, it began from recruiting, but then was incorporated into their strategy. I'm sure if you contacted folks there, they'd be happy to share that as well. Thank you to both of you. So let's move on. All right, time for you to participate. So I want to know a little bit more about what are your areas of focus or challenge. And I put some here: staff development, recruitment, promotion, leadership, strategic planning, employee engagement, and so forth. What I'd like you to do is to simply, whatever ones ring true for you right now, just throw them into the chat box and we'll do this kind of informal poll of either areas of focus or things that are keeping your service up at night in terms of people strategy. Hannah, Michaela, I don't see a chat box here.
Yep, so we can see it on our end. We have one response in there so far. So recruitment, staff development, employee engagement, promotions, leadership development, succession planning, keeping members motivated, lots of engagement.
Okay, great.
And Mitch, while you are running this chat, if you did want to launch the poll again, it is working now, just so you know.
Okay.
See more recruitment and succession planning, more engagement, employee
Interesting.
engagement.
It's interesting that I'm seeing, I think recruitment I may have anticipated, and Diane and Carrie Lynn, I'm not sure what you would have anticipated there, but employee engagement seems to be coming up as a theme as well.
Yep, leadership development, promotion.
One that we're not, have you seen succession planning in there, Hannah?
Yep, I've seen it a couple times.
Okay, great. Yeah, you know what? Let's run the poll. I'd be curious to know what folks are doing in terms of using data analytics. So can we post that poll now?
Sure, I'll launch that now.
Excuse me.
Mitch, can you see that on your screen?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Perfect. We had
Oh,
someone else.
we do have an I don't know there. Sorry, Hannah, I cut you off.
No, that's all right. We had someone else in the chat say finding a balance of putting some ownership on the members for their own development, leadership, team development, engagement, and succession planning.
That's actually an interesting point. Well, I want to explore that in a second, especially when it comes. Well, actually, I'm going to leave it to the panel and I will comment after they speak to it. All right, we're going to close the poll off and let's see the results.
Sure, we just have a couple more voting right now.
Okay. I really appreciate your participation, everyone. This is really terrific. Thank you.
Okay, I can close that now. Share results. There we go.
We have multiple. Okay, so we have. Okay. We don't have. Okay. All righty. So clearly there's a need, and I think that's also reflect. Thank you for responding to that. And it's interesting with the number of people that signed up for the webinar today that clearly this is a topic of interest to people. So we're going to move on here, if I can. There we go. From theory to action. So both Carrie Lynn and Diane have talked about what their status quo was and how they hope to be able to use analytics, and in their case, the predictive index, to address that status quo and to implement change. So now we're going to get to kind of the nuts and bolts of it. So the orientation, introduction, the implementation steps, and maybe some of the what they learned from resistors and champions, and then some stories about it. So I'm going to go to orientation and introduction to staff. I'm going to go back to Diane and Carrie Lynn. So how were these tools kind of introduced to staff, especially when you think about it from aspects like executive management, senior leadership, frontline management, frontline staff, unions and associations, which is also a reality, as well as applying to its applicability to the sworn or uniform side versus the civilian side. So I'm going to start with Diane this time. So how was this kind of introduced to all of those aspects? If you did address it to all those, or the ones that you addressed it to, Diane?
Yeah, so this actually came to me. It actually started with our chief, and then it sort of trickled down and came to my director of human resources, and then it landed with me. So we already had sort of that top level support to begin with. But in terms of implementing, we started with our senior leadership team, which would be our inspectors and above, as well as our civilian managers and above. We had them do the behavioral assessments themselves first, and we gave them a copy of their report so they could familiarize themselves with the tool. And then we brought our consultant, Mitch, on board, and he did 2 presentations, one in October and the follow-up in December of last year, to our entire senior leadership team. And so we covered off how the PI tool can be used in terms of self-awareness, role awareness, and all the different facets of PI. So we started sort of with that group. And then more recently, we've moved into offering this to our mid leaders. So in this case, this is our sergeants, staff sergeants, and civilian supervisors. Very similarly, we've offered them the behavioral assessments, given them their reports, and we're rolling out very similar meetings. So we've kind of taken a top-down approach to how we roll this out.
Thank you. Diane, do you have any comment in terms of, and if you don't, that's fine, in terms of any of the associations or unions involved?
Yeah, at this point, we haven't involved our association. Really, I see this program in the way that we've been rolling this out as simply a value-added process where we're giving them more information to help better their relationships. So there's been no communication at this point with the association.
Okay, thank you. Carrie Lynn, over to you. Talk about, if you could talk about your, how you kind of rolled this out to the various folks at Greater Sudbury Police Service.
So our approach was a little bit different. We actually learned as an HR branch more about the use of analytics through the HRPA. And so being an HR staff that's very advanced in their thinking and really strategic, always trying to come up with more answers to the why and how can we do better, we brought it forward as something potentially we could look at in the use of analytics. We then introduced it to, I introduced the concept at our supervisor training courses, as well as my coaching and trainer courses. So really explaining to them how I thought they could utilize it in effectively interacting with their own employees, and they liked it. And in all those courses, all of the members were given the opportunity to do their own assessment, and many took that, that opportunity. I would say that it was introduced to our association because anytime you present to a group of members, you're going to have association members involved. And some of the cautions or some of the concerns right from the onset was, well, will this eliminate people from positions? Are you going to start to do job assessments in these are the behaviors and the traits and the strengths that we need in specific positions, and therefore if I don't have them, I can't get that job. So there had to be some cautions around all of that and the language that you're using. I like how Diane described it. It's really just, it's an enhancement. It's to understand the employee better and really to help the employee understand, is this something you're going to enjoy? Is this a job that is well suited to your strengths? And if there's some variance, then these are things that you will have to challenge yourself on or maybe receive extra training in. And so we've just been cautious in that wording. But and slowly, you know, as word gets out, you have more teams that want to do it. You have more supervisors. I definitely have part of my SOA leadership team that has done it. And I've really kind of just put it out that if members would like to, we can. And then in certain processes with new applicants for sure, we use it as part of our recruitment.
Great, thank you. And just a few thoughts I would offer. It's interesting that there's two different approaches. For those of you who don't know, Brian Larkin is the chief for the Waterloo Region Police Service. He's also the chair or the president of the Canadian Police Chiefs. Brian's a very animated guy, as many of you may know, very forward thinking, and kind of latched right onto this. But needed, you know, he has two deputies that are sort of like the yin to his yang, and so keep him. Well, they're good balance for each other. And so that was, as Diane said, more sort of a top-down approach and implemented that way. Whereas Carrie Lynn's initiative began sort of mid-level and has just kind of radiated out through the organization. But the thing I will tell you, in both cases, whether actively or you know, more obviously or less obviously present, the support of senior staff has been there. And that is absolutely essential to not only in police services, but the implementation of any initiative, be it, you know, analytics, predictive index, whatever, anything that's going to have major impact on an organization. If senior leadership, and I know this from personal experience as having led a school board of 2,000 employees, 24,000 students, and, you know, that many more parents and community. If you don't have buy-in from senior leadership, then don't expect that the membership and the staff to be engaged in it enthusiastically. So it really needs, whether, you know, it needs to be supported from the top. The other, and I like that comment, not that it matters if I like it or not, but I certainly support the comment of people taking responsibility for their own professional development. So when you have, and that comes down to the validity of your information. If the information about yourself is valid and it's, you know, validated by, you know, lots of research studies to test these tools, then there's a higher probability of it being successful in terms of implementation. If the tool that you're using is your boss's opinion or somebody else's opinion, and something that is subjective and perceptual, you can anticipate where that's going to go. And so with clients that I work with, we talk about unions and associations and so forth. I basically asked this, well, just two things. One, as both Diane and Carolyn have said, it needs to be formative. It needs to be about growing and supporting. It can't be about limiting or using it as a screening tool, exclusionary. That won't work. But the other part that I say to people who may have some challenge with it is, what data would you rather have? Would you rather have data that's based on someone else's perception of you, or some form of analytics that actually have been validated to be able to give you accurate information about yourself and the people you work with? And you can anticipate what the answer to that will be. So I think unless we haven't covered some spots, I think we've talked about implementation steps. Certainly Diane has. Carolyn, did you want to add anything in terms of your rollout or your implementation?
I think you best described it when you said that it just kind of started mid-level and it's just evolved into everything. I just met with a brand new supervisor yesterday, and it's just a perfect way to help this supervisor succeed with a team that he hasn't met yet. So I have the team analytics. I understand who this team is and where their strengths lie. And so it's just a really easy way to start to help the supervisor understand who he's working with, and then help them understand who their new supervisor is. So I think it just keeps evolving. I like analytics because you just discover more and more ways to use it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to just take a quick breather and ask if anyone has any questions from the group of either Diane or Carolyn or myself.
No open questions in the chat right now.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on. Inevitably, when you're dealing with some type of major change that impacts everybody in the organization, you're going to run into resistors and you're going to run into champions. So I'm going to go back to Carolyn and Diane and ask, did you run into resistors or resistance? How did you respond to that? And what was the role? What's been the role of champions in terms of putting this into action? I'll go over to Diane first.
Okay, so yeah, again, we had that top level support to start with, but when we did start to roll it out to our senior leaders, that's a group for our organization of about 40 people. So a lot of diversity within that group and different opinions. And so we did have some resistance within that group to begin with. And the way I addressed it was going back to my consultant. I was still fairly new to PI at that time. So chatted with Mitch, and he gained some more insights about how to respond, and learning more about, if the report doesn't necessarily reflect you, now we can maybe look at doing readbacks, and what insights can we gain through that. We also had some resistance on the hire side. So how are we going to apply this? Some of what Carrie Lynn's already mentioned. Is this going to exclude me from a potential future promotion, for example? So again, just as Mitch chatted about earlier, providing them that exact information. Would you rather that information come from a supervisor, from someone else, or from you directly, and just giving them that information? So in terms of early adopters, though, we had several early adopters from the SLT, and one of the biggest things that got people on board within our senior leadership group was doing the relationship guides. So we offered that to all senior leaders to do with each other, and that generated a lot of conversation and a lot of feedback in our SLT meetings. There's a lot of conversation there and really positive feedback. So I think that was one of the best ways to get people on board with this.
Great, thank you. And we're going to elaborate on the relationship guides in a little while here. Thank you for that. Carrie Lynn, resistors and champions. Now you may be the ultimate champion there, right?
Maybe. I think it's evolving, though. I think your resistors sometimes become your champions, to be honest with you. In especially hiring, Diane is completely right. How is this going to help us find the right candidates? We're not finding the right candidates. There's something wrong with this process. And I get it. Like, people are just so frustrated. You spend so much time training and then they're not successful, or the employee decides this is not the job for them and they transfer out. It's really hard on employee engagement. And, you know, there was some resistance that I don't think this is going to help. And then slowly, because we've now been doing work with analytics for a couple of years now, you start to see it, that maybe this is helping a little bit in identifying the strengths and the behaviors of the candidates that we're bringing to you. My trainers, like, I do a meeting, I do the relationship guide between the new recruit, whether it's civilian or sworn, and their trainer or coach. And then the same coach will come back and say, okay, can I get the assessment for the next one? Because it really helps prevent some of that friction when the coach and the trainee are kind of butting heads a little bit and they can't figure out why. And it's really all about how I learn and how you learn, and where my strengths lie and where your strengths lie, and they like it. So they become my champions because they're the ones asking for the information. I always tell people too that it really helps you better understand yourself. These are my strengths. This is what I do well. So then when you go into an interview, you can better describe yourself to the panels. And I literally have, you know, people come back and they've used language from their own analytics to better explain why they are suited for the position they're now applying for. So they become their own champion.
A great analogy and story for sure. And we're actually going to have some stories as well in a few moments. I want to come back to something Carrie Lynn said earlier about the HRPA, Human Resources Professionals Association. And with the point being that it doesn't hurt for any of us in any sector that we're in to look outside of our sectors to understand some of the cool stuff that's going on out there. I know that, you know, otherwise you have a very myopic view of the world. But I actually met Carrie Lynn at a HRPA talk up in Sudbury about a couple of years ago now. And I continue to do HRPA presentations to local chapters just on the topic of analytics. I'm not out there selling anything. It's just, here's some stuff that you can think about in terms of supporting the people strategy in your organization. So it's always good to look outside sometimes of your own sort of immediate vicinity to see what other people, sectors, other professionals are doing when it comes to various forms of strategy, and in this case, people strategy. I want to come back to another yes.
We do have one question in the box for you.
Yeah.
It comes from Rory Thompson. He would like to know if it would be possible to get an example report to see the type of data that is being assessed.
Sure, absolutely. As a matter of fact, all of participants in today's webinar are going to have an opportunity to try out some analytics. So I'm happy to do that and happy to provide some sample reports, and I'll give you some contact information afterwards. Okay, thank you for the question. Coming back to the sort of dealing with or addressing the concerns of resistors and so on, and especially in the high the high level of tension or the high level of stress associated, particularly in policing. One of the things I would say to people is, so you have a partner, you're going into a deal with a situation that is potentially dangerous. Who would you rather have with you in that situation? Someone who's the best fit for the job, or someone who may not be? So that's another thing that I put out there for consideration. All right, onward and upward. Now we're going to talk about impact. So this is the so what question. Okay, so we talked about this analytics. Carrie Lynn and Diane are doing this in their services. They talked about what's happened. I think Carrie Lynn has kind of talked about impact in some of the things that she said. And so I'm going to ask both Carrie Lynn and Diane, what was the impact? How do you know? What were you measuring? What is the evidence to support the implementation of this stuff? So I'm going to Diane now for that. So Diane, What's been the impact at Waterloo Region Police Service?
Yeah, so we're fairly new at PI. It really only started to be implemented in our service back in October of 2020. But already, I'd say the biggest impact is it's generating a lot of conversation and interest. So as soon as we did the SLT rollout and then the mid-leader rollout, I'd get a flurry of emails from people asking, can I get a relationship guide with this person, and could we implement this in our small team or work unit so we can start to understand some of the dynamics that are happening within our unit. So I think the conversation and that high level of interest is sort of how I've been anecdotally assessing the impact of PI on our organization. We haven't yet had the chance to roll out metrics, so to speak. Again, our mid-leader rollout is very fresh. We just rolled this out about 4 weeks ago. So we're still just starting out, but already we've had just a ton of interest and positive feedback from different people. And right now already I'm starting to roll this out to one of our small teams and doing some work with a really small work unit using PI to start to understand self-awareness and colleague awareness.
Okay, great, thank you. And one of the things I forgot to mention about Diane is that Diane is married to a veteran police officer as well. So both Diane and Carrie Lynn bring real life, real world police perspective to their roles here. Did you want to add anything, Carrie Lynn, in terms of impact? You've kind of alluded to it. I mean, you've mentioned some things, but.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Diane. I mean, the analytics is a little bit tough in that some of it is subjective, in that you're just getting, you know, anecdotally from a coach saying, I really use this. I do debriefs twice a year with my coaching staff and trainees. And so I've started to ask them, how did you use this information within your coaching strategies? And then I think slowly, I want to see whether or not it's having an impact on recruitment and, you know, retention of employees. Again, like communications is one that I mentioned, but that training program is almost a year. So it's going to be a little bit of time to see, is that helping? And then I think the other area that I'll get into a little bit later is just with regards to relationships between employees and, you know, previous employees that were really having issues with each other, just personality wise, behavioral wise, not understanding each other. I think we've definitely made some strides in that area.
Okay, great, thank you. And one of the, and Diane, or sorry, Carrie Lynn mentioned coaching, and coaching has been brought up a few times. And I do a lot of work with clients around leadership development, coaching, mentoring. The interesting thing about coaching and development is that, you know, we often look at coaching and mentoring as sort of the pouring from one vessel, you know, one person's brain into, you know, the receiving keener brain of the person who's learning. And we sort of move to that transactional thing. And I use a coaching model called the 5E coaching method. And it begins with the fact that a coaching relationship is between two people, along with their behaviors, along with their motivations, along with their biases. And so, for example, you've got, let's say, a coach who is very much by the book, you know, very precise, very focused on scheduling and deadlines and so forth. And you've got a mentee, or coachee, as some people would call them, who's more about adaptability, flexibility. I don't know if any of you have run into a person, you know, who takes the perspective, it's a guideline, not a deadline, right? So imagine what happens in that coaching relationship before you even get to the dissemination of knowledge. So if that person knows that about if the mentor knows that about the mentee, they can anticipate what kind of behaviors they're going to get from them. They may understand them a little better when they tend to be a little more flexible, adaptable, but at the same time, you know, they'll need to perhaps keep a particular eye on setting expectations. Conversely, because it goes both ways, the mentee, who's more about, you know, flexible, adaptable, rule bender as opposed to follower, but if it's a role that requires a high degree of exactitude, precision, and by the book and risk management and so forth. They need to know that about the job, but they also need to know that, respect and understand what their mentor is and who that person is and what drives them, what motivates them. Why are they on my case? Like for this deadline and so forth. So when you get into coaching and development and training and all those kinds of things, you can never forget that coaching and training occurs between people and all the stuff that comes with people. So these analytics, I mean, they can be used for, and I haven't paid Diane to say PI when she talks about analytics, but analytics can be used for helping even to figure out the two people in that relationship. And Carrie Lynn's alluded to that as well. Okay. Next step. So Diane and Carrie Lynn, where are you going with this now? Like where are you headed in terms of where do you see this going in terms of your own services, in terms of the implementation of analytics? Let's go to Diane. You kind of mentioned you're sort of mid-level, so go ahead.
So I got really excited there when Carrie Lynn talked about doing the relationship guides with the coaches and the recruiter trainee, because this is something we're on the cusp of rolling out at our service with our next intake of recruits. We've got 26 new recruits who are coming back from the police college, and we're going to be paired up with their coaches, and we're going to start to implement this. So so that's really exciting. And the other thing that we're starting to roll out is on the hire side, using job targets to assess job fit with candidates. So we're really starting to pilot. We have developed job targets for our 911 dispatch, our communications positions, as well as our records position. So we're starting to pilot this in a real world external hiring situation. So I'm excited to see some of our results that we get from that.
Thanks, Diane. I'm going to talk about job targets and job assessments when we get to the application piece. Next steps, Carrie Lynn, for you.
I've definitely started to use it more in workplace issues between employees, trying to really build this as it doesn't have to be punitive. It doesn't have to be personality based, which actually turns out to be a lot of the cause of people not getting along. And trying to build on those relationships and understanding each other, and then using that also as what do you as a member need to strive to do to better relate to the employees that you work with. The other area that I've started to use it a little bit is employees that are leaving the organization and or who have not done well, maybe in a specific position and just don't feel like they're a fit for it, and what should they do? And it's actually working quite successfully. I think it's really good for the employee to realize that, I have some fantastic strengths. I have some interests, and maybe it's not me. Maybe I actually just don't fit this job. So it's not me that is a failure. It's that this wasn't the best fit. I thought it was going to be. Maybe I misunderstood what this position was. And so then, kind of helping them do that professional development piece for what could you aspire to get into instead. And then on that as well, we always learn and think, okay, so if this person thought the job was going to be one thing and it didn't suit them, then how do we better advertise this job? How do we better explain to candidates coming into it what it truly the needs are, and even work those into interview questions? If I need someone who's extremely detailed and extremely independent, then ensure I'm really asking that in the interview, because that's the behaviors and the traits that I'm really going to need.
Great, thank you. Thanks to both of you. So we've talked about next steps. Let's talk about any additional lessons you've learned from your implementation so far, or anything that you would say was pivotal to successful implementation of using analytics in your police service. Let's go with Diane.
Yeah, so I think the biggest lesson that I learned in rolling this out was to have my frequently asked questions, or an FAQ, ready to go before I started rolling this out, especially to our mid leaders, and to know upfront how I'm going to address privacy issues and all the questions that people are going to naturally have, and to have my answers ready before I start to bring this on board. Then the other thing is I sort of started to, after this got covered off by our senior leadership team, I went right into developing job targets before I got the mid leaders really familiar with these analytical tools. And there was a lot of confusion over what we were doing and why we were doing this in our hiring phase. So I think stepping back, bringing our mid leaders up to speed on these analytics and what tools are available and why we're doing this first has been really beneficial, getting that buy-in from them, and then now introducing the higher tools that are available.
Okay, thank you. Carrie Lynn?
Yeah, I think that's really good insight, Diane. We're just excited because we see all the potential of all the different ways we can use analytics, but maybe not rushing. I would agree with you that was something I've learned, is not to rush it. And then the second piece is it can't be a novelty. Don't drop it. If I'm going to do it with one coaching team or one recruitment team, I need to do it with the next one. I need to make sure I'm doing that follow-up. Because otherwise, one, I'm not going to have the data to figure out if it's actually having any applicability. And two, it can't just be the flavor of the month, because I think, especially within policing, we just get inundated with so many different things that you really have to stay engaged and committed to it.
And those are all great points. And I want to elaborate a little bit on terms of accountability. Because if there's no accountability, and again, this could be analytics, this could be, some other initiative, whether it's in policing or not. Actually, Diane mentioned that we had 2 meetings that I was involved with the senior leadership. So it was about 40, so chief, deputy, superintendents, and inspectors. And there needs to be some built-in accountability in order for this stuff to gain some traction. So the way these 2 meetings went was it was introduced to the leadership. The analytics were introduced to the leadership, and we gave them tools. We put the tools in their hands, and I said to them, look, this has to be easy enough for you. The goal for me is to make this easy enough for you so that when this first session is done, you can go out and use it easily. Furthermore, we're going to meet again. So that was October. We're going to meet again in December, and we're going to talk about how did it go. So when you're looking at, again, whether it's analytics or any other implementation, and I've learned this from my own experience in system, enterprise level change and leadership change. If you don't build in that accountability, then people are, again, as Carrie Lynn said, it's going to be a flavor of the month and adios. And I, for one, am not in this business looking at, transformational work with organizations and leaderships to waste people's time. So there has to be that built-in accountability, and it has to be buy-in from the senior leadership and all levels of management to hold themselves as well as the people that report to them accountable. Great, thanks for those lessons learned and key to success. Any additional stories, any cool stories from, anecdotal stories from either one of you in terms of some of the stuff you heard back from folks? I don't care, let's see, Diane, you go first.
Yeah, I think this harkens back to a little bit what Carrie mentioned earlier, that sometimes the people who are the most resistant in the beginning can turn into your strongest supporters. And I definitely had that with some of our senior leaders who initially, when they got their behavioral assessment, said things like, oh, I don't feel like that's really me. I'm not sure about this. But after being able to have a conversation with Mitch, and doing a little bit more work in terms of the read back and explaining the PI tool, this member in particular that I'm thinking of, we were able to really get her on board, and she's now a strong supporter of these analytics. So just spending that extra time to go through and address concerns and sympathize with what people are telling you, and we've really been able to turn some people around and get them on board with this.
Great, thank you. Carrie Lynn?
I love having those conversations with members when they've done their assessment, and then they're like, well, I don't know, I'm not sure this is me. And I mean, I'm a service of 440 members, so I generally know most of my members, and so I usually sit there smiling thinking, oh my, this is exactly you. And usually we end up in laughter when we start to, you know, discuss what various areas mean to them and strengths. And then it usually moves to them having a lot of realizations and thinking, I think I'm going to bring this home and share this with my partner or my children. And now I start to understand relationships I have with other people, because they can already see wheels starting to turn and realize that if I'm a really reserved person, I'm not a social person. I enjoy doing things on my own, but my partner, either at work or at home, is extremely social, loves that stuff. Okay, now I get why the two of us can't agree what we're going to do with our day off. So it just evolves into really a bigger picture for themselves and ways they can use it way beyond work.
Thank you to both of you. And I had the same experience with my wife, actually. When I first did these analytics and it came back with my report, I went, I'm not so sure. And I showed it to my wife and she said, that totally nailed you. So it's one of the things that kind of convinced me as to the merits of these analytics. The other point I want to make is that, you know, I have been involved with both police services. I only get as involved as the clients, and in this case, Waterloo and Greater Sudbury, want me to be involved. And, you know, as Diana suggested, there's been a fair amount of my involvement at the beginning and the front end. But one of the things, and again, whether it's Predictive Index or any other tools that you use, one of the things that's really important is to have internal capacity with and familiarity with the tools, so that, you know, there is the ability to be able to speak to them in a really informed way. I'm much less involved, you know, as things progress, I pull back. There's a part to our relationship where we train people internally to be able to do the same kinds of things that I do with them initially. And both Diane and Carrie Lynn have received analytics training so that they are increasing their own comfort to be able to interpret results and to apply these analytics in their situation, which is a perfect segue to analytics part 2. And that goes from kind of, again, theory to action and applying the analytics. Just so you know, I'm not averse to sharing information about other analytics that are out there, to be very transparent. But, you know, when you're using analytics tools for people strategy or talent optimization, you're looking at 4 basic areas of application. One is to diagnose, or looking at your organization and getting the temperature of your organization. How engaged are our employees? How do they feel about their boss? How do they feel about their team? How do they feel about the organization? So that's one aspect. Another part is looking at the organization's structure and its alignment to its stated objectives. So, you know, do we have the right levels of decision making? Is everybody aligned in terms of, you know, our overall strategy and objectives? So there's ways to assess that. Another one is the one that people mentioned today most probably fairly frequently, and that is around hiring and recruitment. And I would also add in here promotion. Okay, because promotion really is just another form of hiring to a higher position. And finally, staff development, whether it's individual development, team development, leadership development. So in terms of analytics application and people strategy, you have those 4 basic areas. And there are lots and lots of different players in this game. So this is just a sampling of the various folks out there. You know, many of you have heard of Hogan, you've heard of Myers-Briggs, there's Invisio and Wonderlic and so forth. So even SurveyMonkey's in there, okay? So there are lots of different tools out there that address each one of these areas. But one thing you need to make sure of is that when you are selecting your analytics, that they touch these 4 areas of your organization. Because, you know, every organization wants to be on this trajectory to a positive outcome. You know, we want to achieve our best results. You don't want to be down here as a mediocre organization that just meets the minimum requirements. And there are 4 different forces that will get you there or get you down here. The first one is job fit. Do we have the right people in the right jobs? Do we have the right jobs and the right people in the right jobs? The second one is, how are our teams operating? Are they operating on all cylinders? Are they, are they effective? Are they productive? What's the culture like in our place? And I'm not just talking about buying pizza at lunch, okay? I'm talking about, how do people feel about the organization? How do they feel about coming to work? And I'm saving the most impactful for last, the managers. And it's really about the leaders, because leaders in your organization, whether it be frontline, staff sergeants right up to deputy and so forth, they will all have an impact on these three areas. So whatever you do in terms of applying analytics and applying development in your service, it needs to have an impact on all these four areas. I'm going to come to leadership now. So in this survey, what was the quality that, and in the literature says this too, that's most important to the competency of leaders? Self-awareness, understanding themselves. Okay, so I am, full disclosure, I am coming into zero in a little bit on the predictive index. And again, here's the four areas: the organizational, temperature taking, alignment of strategy, hiring, recruitment and promotion, and development. Predictive index has assessments and resources that address all of these areas. But the fundamental assessments that are involved are the behavioral assessment. So that's an assessment of a person. This takes about 6 minutes. When you're looking at hiring, particularly externally, including the cognitive component, this is not an intelligence test. It's like a mini SAT. So it's a test of general cognitive ability. But Diane and Carrie Lynn have both referred to the job assessment. And this, I'll just speak to this a little bit. So the job assessment allows an organization to create a metric of what they're looking for in terms of the behavioral requirements of a position. So as Carrie Lynn alluded to, is this a job that requires high precision? Or is this a job that requires, effective communications? Do they work and interact with people and so forth, as well as a general cognitive metric. And that will give some insight into, will this job be too easy for a person? Will it be over their heads? How long will it take to onboard them? And so forth. So these basic three assessments really contribute to the resources, the many resources that are generated that speak to each of these areas. And so I'm going to come back to Carrie Lynn and Diane. And I know they've been just itching to talk about the relationship guides and that kind of thing. But looking at all these areas that I mentioned with you before, let's go back to this now, and I'm going to come back to this slide and go to Diane and to Carrie Lynn and ask them to talk about a little bit more, diving into the actual tools and applications that you use and how you use them. So I'm going to go to Carrie Lynn first.
Well, when we asked about, how in the future do we see ourselves using some of this, I think the area that I'd like to talk about is the hiring solutions, the cognitive and the job. That's one I'm really curious about. So we have done some cognitive parallels, and basically what you do is you use employees that are already in the positions that are really successful, and you have them complete it to see just where do you kind of sit in your cognitive levels compared to what the job requires. So for example, 911 emergency communicator, pretty high. And so it's not to say that somebody couldn't do the job, but you as a service are going to have to be prepared to potentially train them a little bit longer or focus on other areas perhaps. And that's good information too for coaches, is that, you might have to have a little bit more patience. Don't expect this person to be, running at 150% right away. You're going to have to take some time. They can still do it. Comparatively, I'm really curious around, I have some employees who I've done cognitive assessments on, and compared to the job assessment, it's exactly that, Mitch. Like they're actually a little bit higher or significantly higher than maybe what the job required. And so I'm curious now in the future to see, do they get bored? Are they going to get bored in that position? And it's actually a conversation that I've had with them. I'm kind of in their onboarding about this is what the job, it's very routine. It's very system driven. It's very procedural. And how do you feel about taking that kind of a job? Because I see that, you pick up on things really quickly. And are you going to want to be like, what's next? What's next? And so I'm curious in that area to see, as the years go by, to see how those employees succeed, and or do they move within the organization somewhere else? And that's not bad either, because that's our succession planning. So.
Mary Lynn, we have a question in the chat for you.
Okay, thank you.
Who measures someone's successes?
Who measures someone's successes? So I guess that would be based, if we were talking about training, it would be based on the training matrix. So I have training matrix for every civilian position within the service and sworn positions. So how are they succeeding in their training? What are our stumbling blocks? How can we better help that employee to succeed? And sometimes I go back to their analytics and say, and then I realize where the glitch is, that we've been trying to train them a certain way and that's not their strength, and we need to train them a different way. Success, sometimes it comes from employee engagement, the employee themselves saying, I absolutely love the job that I got into, or 6 months from now, they're coming to you and they're feeling frustrated. Well, that's a success, or maybe not a success. And where did we miss? What happened for you as the candidate, and what happened for us as the organization? Because we all know that, we put an awful lot of effort into recruiting people and bringing them in. So we want that to be a success. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Diane.
Yeah, we're using all of the tools to some degree on both the Inspire and Hire side. We've currently rolled out the behavioral assessments to approximately 170 members already, and they've received their reports. They have that information. Relationship guides, as I mentioned, as well as the manager strategy guides. So these tell managers, give them some tips and hints as to how to work with their new direct report, and how does that person, want to be recognized for good performance, for example. And then on the hire side, so we're, like I mentioned earlier, developing job targets for a few positions. One of the main concerns we had in our records branch in particular was with retention issues. So they weren't leaving the organization, but they were leaving that unit and going to other jobs within the organization. So we were trying to figure out, why is this happening? And can we find any trends? So we've developed a job target there. And now, similar to what Carrie Lynn said, we're comparing our members who have been in that position in our records unit for a very long time, and members who've gone on to other roles in the organization, and see if we can find any trends and get some indication of what might be happening there.
So, and it's thank you to both of you. And it's a great question around success. So the idea here is that you're trying to create a circumstance, and you even have this in the behavior reports, and you see this manager's guide here, which is, provides a one-pager on certain types of individuals on their team. That allows them some insight into things like, how is your person going to communicate? How do you handle delegation with them? How do you give them feedback? So for example, and you're looking as a leader, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, where you're providing feedback to a person, one person takes it and you can tell it's going in one ear and out the other ear. But another person takes it and they'll take it very professionally and they'll say, yeah, you know what? Okay, I'm going to really work on that and so forth. And you give feedback to another person, and they take it like critical feedback, constructive critical feedback, like a stab in the heart. So now you've got this people issue associated with a leadership function, which if you had some idea of what you were going to expect when you give them that feedback, then you would obviously customize your approach to disseminating that information. But the thing here too, and it's one of the criticisms of when you're looking at job profiling, if you will, against people, personalities. Some people will say, that's just a cookie cutter. People aren't necessarily a perfect match for their job. Absolutely, that's absolutely correct. Nobody is entirely a perfect match for their job. How many of you have walked into your division or your office or whatever in the morning and said, okay, today I just need to be a little more blah, blah, blah. Or today, I need to be a little less blah, blah, blah. Today, I need to get out of my office and get out there and interact with folks. Or maybe I need to spend more time focusing on some of my critical tasks and less time out in the field. Either way, what you're doing is you're doing some self-coaching. And what that indicates is you can still be successful in the job if your picture doesn't match the picture of the job. And you can do it one of two ways. One, you can leverage those parts of your job that you really like, and Carrie Lynn's kind of alluded to that, you know, looking at people and how they fit in roles and say, yeah, this part really appeals to you. And two, by investing in your adaptive capacity. And why would you do that? Well, you might like the people you work with. You might like the work itself. It may not necessarily be something that you would naturally do. So for example, if you're a leader, you need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to be, persuasive. You need to be able to make tough decisions. You need to be able to provide feedback. And if some of those things don't come naturally to you, then you go home and be yourself. As a matter of fact, when people take their job home, that's when you get into mental health issues. But having that awareness will help you to be more successful. So that's the goal here, is to give you as much awareness as possible, eyes wide open, going into the role so you can be successful when you're in the role. You can be, you can engage whatever high yield strategies are necessary to be successful in the role, even if maybe they're not exactly who you are naturally. But when you go home, you just, if you're a private, reserved person who doesn't like talking a whole lot and doesn't like office politics or whatever, then you go home and just be yourself. In fact, that's the healthiest thing you can do. And having an objective way to be able to see that. I mean, I do a lot of stuff in conjunction with people, with other professionals around mental health. And that's one of the big areas, is that disconnect that can sometimes happen when people and job get into some sort of a tension that people aren't aware of. At least if you're aware of it, you can manage it. Okay.
Mitch, I wondered if I could just add one little thing on that with
Sure.
regards to something Diane said, and she's absolutely right. So one of the other areas, because the big question I think from the group was around employee engagement. And so as far as retention goes, we've had some success actually, Diane, with regards to that position of transcribing or data clerk, working in records, and recognizing that, to engage these employees, to retain these employees, what we need to do is revamp this job description. We need to allow for some cross training into other areas like fingerprinting and record checks and informations, so that we can enhance the roles and the tasks that we're giving them and retain them by increasing really what the job entails, and the employee engagement is going up. So it was kind of an aside. It did start at exactly what you were saying, that we couldn't figure out why we couldn't retain people within that area. And I bet you every service online is exactly the same way. And so it allowed us to really reassess what are we giving these employees to do, and can we change that?
And here's the thing, thank you for that. And here's the thing about retention. Retention doesn't necessarily mean that the person is actually leaving the service. It could mean that they've just checked out, or are not as productive as they could be, or worse yet, maybe causing some friction or some morale issues, not only with themselves, but possibly with the people around them. So, retention, especially in the public service, is an issue of not just leaving or being, let go, as they perhaps do a little more liberally in the private sector. It is really an issue that can have a detrimental impact on the organization. Because what it comes down to is people are happiest when they feel engaged, when they're happy with their work, when they're, they feel well suited and well supported by a leader who understands them and understands their needs, based on information that is verifiable and valid. So we're coming close to the end of our time here. I just want to open it up and see if there are any more questions from folks. Michaela, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do.
Or
We
any
have
comments?
one question. Yep. So someone just wants to know, how does this differ from other personality assessments like DISC or EQI?
Great question, thank you. Again, I'm not here to bash other assessments. I've really tried to keep this as generic as possible. I will say in the case of DISC that the person who actually invented the predictive index and the person who invented DISC actually worked together at one point, and the person at DISC went off and on their own and started DISC. So in the case of DISC, they're very clear at the beginning, or sorry, on their website, that it is not appropriate for pre-hire assessment. And the predictive index has been validated by over 500 studies over 60 years, like 60 years for, it also is complies with the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission in the States for both promotion and hiring. So when you're looking at, whether, and as far as EQI is concerned, that's a great question, because there are clients that I work with who see different parts of their talent development strategy being served by different resources. So I might come in and get them started in the predictive index and the analytics around, who are your people, how do they learn, what are their drives and behaviors, what is the connect or disconnect between the person and the role. And then they may bring in an EQI practitioner to help them in terms of some of the deeper kind of emotional stuff around implementing strategies for self-regulation, for being more emotionally conscious and so forth. So it's not unusual to use analytics in a complementary form with one another. But coming back to DISC and coming back to Myers-Briggs and Colors and others, when you are selecting the tools to use for assessment, or if you are in the process of validating what you currently have, make sure that it conforms to things like standards from the American and Canadian Psychological Associations, to the various ministries of labor, and looking at the Human Rights Code and all of those things to see whether or not, and fundamentally, whether there is any research, whether it's gone through a rigorous research-based validation to ensure that the information that the assessments are providing, or the tools, resources are providing, are in fact valid and applicable for what you need. And you need to look at your own organization. Like, do you have the time to have all of your people do a half hour to an hour in assessment? Maybe for senior or executive positions you might do that. But what about at the front end or various levels through that? Do you have that time? Do you have the time to pore over a 50-page report? Do you have the time to try and figure out how to apply that 50-page report? Speaking quite bluntly, the predictive index report is about 2.5 pages long. It's highly validated, and there are an abundance of resources like management guides, relationship guides, and so forth. And I hate to sound like a salesman, but I got the question, so I'm just answering it, that people can use and apply immediately. So it's not a huge imposition. So that's a long-winded answer to a short question. Are there any other questions or any additional comments? Okay, I want to take you to a little bit, very, very quickly. The company that I work for, Predictive Success, we work with over 650 clients in Canada, United States, public and private sector, around using analytics to attract best fit talent, to keep that best fit talent, and to help our clients achieve, their client staff achieve their maximum potential, whether it be frontline employees, managers, senior leaders. I've even worked with boards of directors. We use what's called a talent optimization framework, where we'll look at your business or your organization in this case, and what you're hoping to achieve. And do you have a deliberate people pathway, or are you just kind of hiring because we need that spot because it's empty? What are you doing around alignment? Well, we'll take a look at your organization. What are you doing around development of your people? And what are you doing around ensuring the highest probability of best fit staff? These are just some of the clients that we work with. So we're right up there with 1,000 employee organizations, right down to mom and pop organizations of 1 to 50. Here are some public sector ones. These are my clients. I also work with municipalities. And basically the way we work with our clients is through all of these steps or at any step that they would like. So attracting, recruiting, onboarding, development of staff, especially my work is primarily with teams and leaders, retention of staff and succession planning. So today we've looked at analytics from a basic theoretical perspective. I'm so grateful to Diane and Carrie Lynn for their perspective around bringing this and making it real. We've talked about some of the resources associated with this today. So I hope this information was helpful. And just by way of follow-up, everyone who attended today is going to get an email from me. And in that email will be a link to a little form that you can fill out. Everyone on the webinar today is going to be offered the opportunity to do a behavioral assessment. It takes about 6 minutes to do, and if you'd like a read back on the graphs, I'm happy to arrange that. I'm happy to speak with you or your organization about your own talent optimization strategy or leadership or people strategy. This will not be a sales call. As I mentioned before, I'm a retired public sector leader. I've got a great pension, and I am motivated and driven to assist organizations and be the best they can be. And the best you can be is always going to be through your people. So I'm happy to do that on me. And there'll be a book draw from the president of our company on, he talks a little bit more in depth about using analytics, particularly in the role of leadership. So I'll be drawing 5 winners from that from today. Also, I'm going to be sending each of you links to these documents. This is a benchmarking report which gives some perspective on what CEOs see as the major people challenges for their organizations in 2021, especially coming out of COVID. This guide is a guide toward helping you. And remember that talent optimization framework I showed you? It looks at each piece of that, in terms of aligning your organization's goals, developing your people, looking at your best fit hiring, as well as diagnose, measure what matters, find the right tools. I told you I would send you this checklist and this graphic. Also, if you are interested, and again, this is totally optional, if you'd like any other information regarding, an analytics presentation similar to this with your organization, happy to do that. We have a diversity and inclusion program, which is more a conversation starter. It's not a comprehensive program. It's like an initiation into the issue of diversity and inclusion around the forms of unconscious bias, given by one of my colleagues who's very well versed in this. I can give you some information around talent optimization and some information about how we do this in terms of building capacity at the organizational level, which includes credits. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for participating today. You were engaged. I see a lot of people still stayed on the webinar, so I take that as a high compliment from all of you. I particularly want to thank the 2 panelists, Diane and Carrie Lynn, for lending their perspective. They are, as you are, in the middle of some very busy weeks. Diane told me this is probably one of the busiest weeks of her career. And so to carve out this kind of time for your benefit primarily, I would hope, is really, really appreciated. So I thank you so much. And to Michaela and Hannah, the co-pilots for today, again, my sincere thanks to all of you as well. So my contact information, mlepage at predictivesuccess.com. There's my phone number. That's actually my cell, so it comes right to me. And that toll-free number also comes right to my cell. So I'm happy to speak with any of you. It will not be a high-pressure sales call. That's not the way I do things. If there's we'll talk about your organization. Great. If there's an opportunity to do some work together, great. If there's not, that's fine too. I'm always interested to learn more and to know more about really important organizations, especially those that serve the public. So with that, unless are there any other questions or comments from anyone? Michaela?
No questions so far.
Okay. So with that, I will release you back to your day and to thank you very much for your time. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And I know you've got probably a pile of emails that land on your desk every day, so mine may get a little bit buried. So you can anticipate an email, and you know, there's no urgency. So take the time when you've got a half a minute to explore that. And